my intuition back then is this is going to be important. This can be really good. This can be dangerous. And developing countries are at a great disadvantage because of the lack of understanding, lack of awareness, just an awareness program. And the resolution could not pass because it included the words artificial intelligence. So the other thing that's happening in the US, and I think that's quite positive, actually I like about that, which is kind of the other side of the coin, is that a lot of the problems, policy questions and regulatory questions are being answered by concrete cases, either by regulators, think the FDA, the SEC, are actually addressing concrete cases, and even courts.
Yes, I think you put a finger on something very important that kind of many people find puzzling, that they just think about AI as a monolith, that AI is a something, it's like scissors actually, right? Where what I find is that AI, really to understand AI, you can only do it in context. In the context of a specific domain, only really you know what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, and only then it makes sense to actually have some decisions of how we want this impact to be modulated. Hey, I'm Alexander, and welcome to Before AGI. When we think about AI, we tend to think about the technology, what it can and cannot do, and how this will change the world around us. However, a major factor that will determine the impact of AI on the world will be the governments. How they choose to regulate AI, but also how they choose to use and support this technology themselves. This is why I'm so happy to have Luis Videgaray with us today. Luis teaches at MIT and is director of the MIT AI Policy for the World project. And before this, he had an extensive career in the Mexican government, culminating with him being the Minister of Finance and then the Minister of Foreign Affairs. We will talk about his government experience in Mexico and when he first started thinking about AI, the most pressing policy questions right now, and emerging geopolitical issues. As you will see from our conversation today, Luis is someone who thought deeply about AI even before it was mainstream. Welcome, Luis.
Thank you, Alexander. It's great to be here. So happy you're doing the podcast. For so many years, we talked a lot. I learned so much from you. And I always thought, Alexander should do a podcast. So you're doing it now. Fantastic.
Yeah, you definitely was a big factor that pushed me to that decision. So let's hope we don't regret it. So let me get started. So can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Mexico, Mexico City, and then in the state of Mexico, which is a surrounding state to the capital. I am an economist. I got my undergrad in Mexico, then a PhD at MIT. I did private sector finance for almost 8 years, and then 13 years of a government career, as you just mentioned, and then MIT.
Okay, so why economics?
I grew up in the 80s in Mexico as a teenager, and that was a really, really bad time for the Mexican economy. We went through hyperinflation, deep recessions. I just wanted to understand what was going on. So it felt very natural to go into economics.
Sounds great. So you got your PhD from MIT, which is, of course, the best place to get a PhD from. And then you went into private sector, but then you went to government. Why?
I always had an inclination for the public sector and government, always. And I just had an opportunity to serve at the state level first. I was Secretary of Finance of the state of Mexico in the year 2005, starting there. And 4 years, it was a fantastic experience. And then after that, I went to the federal level.
So what did you enjoy the most about being in the government?
First of all, impact. When you're working in government, and particularly if you're interested in changing things and hopefully improving things, government is a great place for impact. And second, the people. I've met so many smart, hardworking, very passionate people about what they're doing in all levels of government. That I think it was a wonderful experience.
So, what did you not enjoy about being in the government?
First of all, it's incredibly time consuming. So the time for my family, the time particularly for my 3 kids, that was minimized. And for sure, that's the part that I didn't enjoy the most, that I didn't like at all.
So you were actually having this opportunity to be a minister of quite 2 different ministries. Yes, one is the finance and the other one is the foreign affairs. Which one did you enjoy more?
In terms of impact and the things you can do, definitely the finance ministry. But I should say, just being foreign minister was an incredible job. I probably enjoyed a bit more being the foreign minister, because when you're the finance minister, you are just under so much pressure all the time. But I should say, the impact you can actually have is probably a bit more significant when you're the finance minister.
Why the impact is larger when you are a finance minister?
It's all about allocation. It's about allocation of resources, allocation of investment. And that's why you're also under so much pressure. But I think that's what makes it a difference. Also, finance ministers around the world are significant regulators of the financial system, and that's also very impactful.
So what are you the most proud of your time in the government? Like, what kind of things you think, okay, you look back and saying it was worth it. All this work, all this time away from the family was worth it.
I'm mostly proud of a lot of things that we accomplished at the state level, but let me just say that the federal level was altogether 6 years. And I'm very proud of the things that happened at the beginning and at the end. So particularly, at the beginning, we were able to put together a bunch of reforms. Some of them are still there. Some of them were reverted. That's the nature of democracy. But I think that the whole process and the ambition of those reforms and making them real, I'm very proud of that. And working with the people that I worked to do that. And at the very end, just being able to renegotiate the North American Free Trade Agreement and preserving free trade in the region, which is now something very significant for Mexico, for Mexico's present and future. I think I would select those 2 points: the beginning and the end of my federal government career.
I see. So you like, when you talk about the free trade agreement, you mean NAFTA, renegotiating NAFTA?
Yeah, today's the U.S. Mexico-Canada agreement, the USMCA. But it was originally a North American Free Trade Agreement, the NAFTA. It dates back from the early 90s, but it was renegotiated when President Trump was elected.
Okay, so let's go a bit more towards the main topic of our conversation today, AI. So what is remarkable about you? You thought about AI before it was cool, especially before it was cool in the government. Why?
Taxes. That's an obvious.
Death and taxes.
It's an awkward way to get into AI. I acknowledge, but it has to do a lot with government. So I was the Minister of Finance, and as that you oversee the tax collection agency. So we went through this effort to make everything digital. So essentially, taxpayers could not submit their tax returns or anything on paper anymore, and so we went through that. It was to some degree painful, but I probably had these very naive expectations that once everything is digital, everything's going to be very fast. So I remember talking to small and medium-sized companies that were having working capital issues because tax refunds were taking very long, like 40 days, 50 days. And I pressed, the team at the tax collection agency, and they told me we cannot do it. There's no way that we can do it shorter than 3 weeks. That's our best, but our average will always be like 40 days or something. I was just at first I was frustrated, but then I started to figure out what's going on, and you go through this round of talking first to the internal guys, then you go to consultants, and you get the usual suspects, and you start going through that, but nobody could solve the problem. I was, and then we were preparing for Mexico's fintech law. We wanted to create a law to foster and enable fintech, and we did a trip to San Francisco, to the Bay Area, and I ended up talking to a group of Stanford people, and kind of casually at the end of the conversation, I mentioned this problem, and they were immediately attracted to it and say, well, maybe we can help. And they started talking about some things that I barely understood, and I asked, well, how much would you charge for doing this? And the answer was something at that time I did not understand. I said, well, if you share your data, we'll do it for free. And of course, it was the Mexican taxpayers' data, so we couldn't do it just like that. But that got me going. I got very intrigued. We actually signed an MOU. This was the year, I think, 2015. And that's how I learned about this thing called machine learning. And I just got the bug then. And then I went to the foreign ministry and said, well, I still want to do things that relate to machine learning and this thing that people are calling AI. I tried to get the United Nations engaged. So I started working with the UN. What is remarkable, Alexander, is that this is not that far ago. So the year 2017, this is only 7 years ago. Around this time of the year, I was making the rounds in the UN as the foreign minister of Mexico, trying to convince the UN and other countries that the UN should have a program on AI, essentially best practices, and make knowledge available to developing countries. Because my intuition back then is this is going to be important. This can be really good. This can be dangerous. And developing countries are at a great disadvantage because of the lack of understanding, lack of awareness, just an awareness program. And the resolution could not pass because it included the words artificial intelligence. Back then, just 7 years ago, the consensus in the UN was that was not serious. That talking about AI, using the words artificial intelligence, was like bringing something from science fiction, the Terminator or Odyssey 2001. It was not serious. It's interesting that the year after that, we tried again and we got the resolution passed. And now by the fall of 2018, a lot of people, including the Secretary General, were already talking publicly about AI. So things started to change very rapidly. And then my term in government ended, and that's when I got a call from the president of MIT saying, would you like to do AI policy from here? And obviously, I said yes.
Great. So you touched on so many topics that I would like to circle back to. So first, let's talk about exactly, it was like 2016, 2017, where you try to convince UN that, okay, this AI thing is something they should at least pay attention to, or at least be okay with it being mentioned in the resolution.
Yeah, I think it was interesting. It was kind of a negotiation because in the UN, you negotiate a lot about words. We ended up, the consensus, I did not agree with that. That's why we tried again the next year, was that we should talk only about exponential technologies, whatever that means. So instead of talking about AI, we were talking about exponential technologies.
Okay, so that was, they would be fine with this.
Yeah, they were fine with that in 2017. That changed very rapidly.
Actually, it's interesting that UN now is quite active in AI. So I believe just this March, they passed the first resolution about AI, and I think that's not where they want to end. So you were the trailblazer here.
I think I was probably too early. Yeah, the impact of even the resolution that we got in 2018, I don't think that it had any significant impact. But I think it's great that it's now pretty much a central focus of the UN and so many multilateral organizations.
Okay, so 2017, I think there's a saying that the only thing of being too late is to be too early with some kind of idea. So in your case, this may be true, but yeah, 2017, no one really cares in the AI, like in the policy world. There's no really AI policy. There's just no one cares in policy about AI. But things have changed since. So could you kind of walk me through how did this landscape of policy, AI policy, evolve since 2017?
It's completely different. Actually, we went from nothing to an actual very busy field with a lot of people, with debates, disagreements, different strategies, different approaches. So it's something new, something completely new was created. I think we have to think that when we think of AI policy, governments essentially do three things around AI. First of all, they're regulators. They create laws. They enforce laws. On regulations. And when I say government, by the way, I'm talking about the public sector broadly, including the judicial, the legislative branches, not just the executive branch. So governments first regulate. Number two, governments are huge users of AI. So if you think, if you are let's say an AI company based in San Francisco, I think
completely random
example. You probably think that government as a sector is an important use case and an important client. The decisions that governments make around how they use AI are consequential. And third, of course, governments can do a lot of things to enable AI creation and adoption. either by establishing resources, by doing grants for research, education. So you have these three roles. And I think it's what is fascinating about the state of the field of AI policy today is the lack of consensus of how to do things. I think we went through a process where people in government and policy environment we're trying to figure out, is this dangerous? Is this problematic? This was the era of AI principles. But we're talking 2018, 19, maybe 20. The OECD came with a very thorough, influential set of principles back in 2019, where we realized, okay, AI can be biased. AI may not be that the outcome of AI may not be explainable. There are some risks. There are some problems when AI is deployed. I think that was the initial process, and I think that there's now kind of an agreement of what the problems are. But beyond that, there's a lot of disagreement. First, which are the important problems? Not all people agree. You have this debate, for example, the AI ethics camp debates the AI safety camp. Some people are more concerned about problems that are manifest today, problems that we already have with the current AI systems. Some people are just focusing on the future problems of AI. By the way, very few people think about what's happening in between, and that's why I love what you're doing, both with around preparedness and also before AGI. But there's a lot of debate on what's important, what's the real risk, and perhaps more consequential, what to do about it. And you see a wide spectrum of policies and regulatory frameworks. You have the European Union and other places going for very ambitious, comprehensive attempts to regulate, to countries that explicitly say, we're not regulating AI. We are concerned about innovation and competitiveness, and we are not going to regulate AI, and everything in between. So this is a time where people kind of understand that this is important, that the government has to play an active role, but not a lot of agreement on how to do it.
Yes, I think you get it right. And it's a healthy thing that there is just such a diversity of opinions and approaches in this space. And you mentioned this AI ethics camp, which is kind of focused mostly on the impacts right now, in particular.
And rightly so.
And rightly so. No, I just definitely I think this is very important. I'm just trying to paint the picture, is that trying to focus on the current harms, potential harms, or real harms that are already happening and how to prevent them. And then something that was dubbed the AI safety camp, which focuses more on the longer term risks here. And as you said, I really like also to think in between things, that there is something important in between that we should also be thinking about. And indeed, my team preparedness is thinking about this. And to be honest, one thing that I always am puzzled by is why there's a bit of either this or this. There's this almost a conflict between these two camps, because you would think that both of these goals are at least compatible with each other, and complementary. So why do you think there's a bit of tension?
I think there's a resource allocation problem and an attention allocation problem. I think that particularly those that are concerned with ethical issues of AI, which are very real, particularly in the developing world, I think are incredibly important and dangerous, are concerned that suddenly policymakers and AI developers will get distracted from addressing those because they're thinking about a distant and uncertain future. So I think some people just consider that we gotta set priorities and start first with the problems that are real and known and pressing, and not and fear that by thinking too far into the future, and particularly an uncertain future, because nobody knows exactly what's going to happen, we are getting distracted and we are not addressing the problems the way we should. And this is not only about the ethics, but also about economic problems, or challenges around AI, jobs, monopolies, financial stability. There are so many concerns that are more immediate, and I hear a lot of people that are concerned about allocation. I tend to think like you, that we should be able to do both things, or the three things, or the four things at the same time, because all these problems are real, all these challenges are real, and also the opportunities are very real. So I think I understand debates. I acknowledge the differences, and but I think we should probably just get going on addressing all the challenges.
Yeah, so this is the thing that I also want to always reinforce, that there are real challenges here, but there are also opportunities. Otherwise, why would we do this in the first place? Like, it's a technology that we are controlling. So you mentioned, actually, you had this nice characterization that there is this governments are involved in AI via regulations, but also they are the users and they're also enablers of AI. So I actually would like to revisit all three of these categories. Let's start with regulations. So could you give us like a quick overview of what is the regulatory situation right now in AI? Like, kind of which countries are the leaders in this space? What are the different camps, and kind of which regulations are kind of following, representing each of these camps?
Well, I think there are very different approaches. So you have countries, for example, like India or South Korea, that are, they have they're incredibly competent in technology and have quite explicitly decided not to regulate yet. This is not the time. This is the time for innovation. This is the time to just foster the creation of new things and the adoption of things. Very focused on competitiveness. And then you have countries that have been that are already regulating countries, or I should say regions, because the European Union is a supranational entity that have already created rules. In fact, the country that has been quicker to do AI laws is China, and China has been quite active and quite quick into doing. It does not have the same approach as the EU, which is having a single law to regulate AI, a very comprehensive effort. China has been addressing the different problems at different stages with different laws, but you have these two extremes, and then you have countries that are looking into regulation. For example, Brazil has been considering in the Senate a law for over a year, not that different from the European law, a little bit more stringent on certain elements of the law. And of course, you have the U.S., where so far, aside from an executive order, which is not a law, there's a lot of conversation around the problems, some bipartisan initiatives, but it's not happening yet. And I cannot predict what will happen in Washington, but most people would say that it's difficult to get something done in that environment.
Okay, so just to summarize, you have countries that just chose, we already kind of commit to delay any regulations. For now, it will be laissez-faire. It'll just kind of, let's build the technology and see what happens. Then there are countries or supranational regions as European Union, which actually try to have very ambitious framework, the AI, the EU AI Act. And then there is China, which, by the way, I must say, their regulations actually are quite sophisticated and quite interesting.
Of course.
Which is this big asterisk that it only applies to, essentially does not apply to the government, which is a very interesting difference, which I guess explains a different philosophy and the political situation in that country. But they're actually very sophisticated. I actually must say that I was impressed. And yeah, then there is the...
I definitely agree.
What do you think US should do here?
I think one of the big risks in the US is that the US is so decentralized by history. The political culture in the U.S. is a true federation, and because of the lack of federal action, we're already seeing states and even cities regulating. So I think there's a little bit of a risk in the U.S. that you end up with this patchwork of regulations, and you have some states allowing things and some states banning stuff. For example, the state of Colorado a couple of years ago banned the use of AI for certain types of insurance underwriting. It just the city of New York banned the use of AI algorithms for hiring. So you cannot do that in the city of New York. In New York City, you can do it in New Jersey. You cannot do it in New York City. I think that the lack of federal action is or the having a federal framework that is not there because of the political nature of the U.S. You can end up with this kind of inconsistent, difficult to navigate environment where you have different laws depending on where you are in the U.S. And of course, there are some areas that are only part of the federal government. I think the executive order is addressing pretty much all the right issues. It's actually a great checklist of the things that you should care about, but it's not law. It's not. Most of it is not binding. It's just an indication of where you want to go, but it's definitely not a federal framework. So I think a federal framework would probably be better than having this set of rules. The other thing that is happening in the U.S., and I think that's quite positive. Actually, I like about that, which is kind of the other side of the coin, is that a lot of the problems are being answered. A lot of the policy questions and regulatory questions are being answered by concrete cases, either by regulators. Think the FDA, the SEC, the FTC are actually addressing concrete cases, and even courts. So that makes the system to be much more focused into outcomes than trying to regulate how you make AI. What are the inputs that go into AI? What are the processes? Some of the laws, including the European law, focus a lot on the inputs. I think that it's interesting by not having a law, you end up creating rules and precedents, even doctrine, just from going after outcomes.
Okay, so just to summarize, I think if I'm reading correctly, you think that this, like the fact that there is no federal regulation in the US, it's probably not a good thing because they will get this patchwork of different, maybe somewhat inconsistent rulings and regulations locally and even at the city level. And I think you are hinting at something that, okay, so maybe let me ask directly. So what do you think about the EU AI Act?
I think there are many good things about it. I think it was a very comprehensive effort, but it was challenging to do something like that. First of all, because AI has been changing so rapidly. So the first draft was made public in April 2021, when essentially the technology, when we say AI today, that technology did not exist back in April 21. People would think things like ChatGPT, that did not exist back then. It was not available. Was not in the minds of the underpinnings of it were already there. You obviously knew about it as a scientist, and the developers knew about what was coming, but certainly not the politicians, not the regulators. So the EU law is a law that has been amended before being enacted. So it's kind of a moving target. But also trying to have a single law for everything is super, super challenging because AI is a general purpose technology. So I'll give you, and we typically don't regulate everything that can happen with general purpose technology. I'll give you an example of a technology that is general purpose: scissors. Scissors. That's a general purpose technology. You can do great things with scissors. You can cook. You can do clothing. You can get it in. You can go into the operating room. Surgeons use it, but also it can be deadly. You can kill people. You can do a lot of damage, property damage. But there's no law, and there are no op-eds claiming for the urgent need to regulate scissors. We focus on the outcomes because we have laws against murder, against liability, against property damage, and their processes. So because it's an incredibly hard task to imagine all the many bad ways that scissors could be used, or knives, whatever. These are very general purpose pieces of technology. So it's very hard to imagine all the things that AI will be used to. Actually, we don't know how AI will be used. So trying to regulate how it's made and how it's used when it's so general, I think that's problematic, and that's a challenge for the European framework.
Okay, so you are saying essentially that it might be difficult to make this law be truly as comprehensive as it has ambition to do. I think they also already started to a little bit backpedal on this by just having now an agency that will be deciding the details of how it is applied. So maybe that's some realization of that here.
Yeah, which is also an intriguing an intriguing framework because the uses of AI go into domains that are very different. So and where you already have regulators. So if you're thinking about AI in healthcare, let's just think about AI in healthcare for diagnosis. That's you have specific regulators in the US is the FDA regulating medical devices. And now are you going to have another layer of regulator who are not specialists who don't understand healthcare, and just the interaction, perhaps even the turf wars between regulators? I think that those can be complicated, and you can think the same about transportation. You can think about the same as for consumer protection, of course, finance. There are some. Each domain is so specialized and so different from a regulatory perspective that I'm a bit I'm certainly intrigued about to see how these overlaying horizontal regulator that focuses on the technology are going to interact with the regulators that for decades have the domain expertise and have been responsible of each of these sectors.
Yes, I think you put a finger on something very important that kind of many people find puzzling, that they just think about AI as a monolith, that AI is a something. It's like scissors, actually, right? Where what I find is that AI, really, to understand AI, you can only do it in context. In the context of a specific domain, only really you know what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, and only then it makes sense to actually have some decisions of how we want this impact to be modulated. So I guess it might be a bit more difficult, if I understand correctly what you are saying.
Definitely more difficult than scissors, for sure.
Yes, but also more difficult for the European approach to this, to actually properly recognize that nuance.
Yeah, I think the European approach, we all have to praise, admire what Europe was able to do, because how it placed this AI at the center of the debate, how it mobilized and create consensus around an emerging technology that can be so impactful. But nobody really knows how to regulate AI, and the first attempts, and this is a very early attempt to do it, are it's natural to expect that there are going to be some adjustments that will need to be made in the future, and hopefully the framework allows for that.
Circling back to the US, what should the US do in this space? So you are saying we need federal regulations, but any ideas what kind of federal regulations?
I think that there are some issues where, beyond trying to go for this umbrella horizontal regulation, but some federal action would be very good. For example, but again, I'm much more inclined into go sector by sector. So, for example, in healthcare, data sharing is an issue. And there's good reason for that. But the creating a framework in which researchers can use broader data, more representative data, to train good tools while protecting privacy and the patient's rights to their data. I think that would be something very useful, and it's just an example. But that needs to be done at the federal level. I think obviously in finance there are potential risk systemic issues that are not very well understood, that probably require action. And it's just there are some critical domains that require federal action, and also there are obvious instances where not having federal action creates coordination problems. Think transportation. I mean, vehicles move around the country and outside the country. So you want to have federal rules for that, and then you go into problems where jurisdictions are pretty much irrelevant, like all things related to persuasion. State jurisdiction is very high. It's kind of an overreach trying to regulate persuasion just from the regulatory purview of a state or a city. So there are some things where the federal purview is probably the more the proper allocation of the regulation, but again, I don't think that trying to do a single AI law and having I know that makes a lot of headlines and people like to think about it, but probably that's not useful. But having federal regulation, sector by sector, or even problem by problem, I think makes sense. And probably will accelerate development, but also make us better prepared.
Yes, preparedness is all that I care about here.
Yeah. I'm gonna try to mention the word prepared or preparedness at least 10 times. I think I did 3 already.
Yes, I expect at least 10. I just want to say that's part of the deal to be on the podcast.
Okay.
So, so you have an idea of, or at least maybe not proposal, but an idea, or at least how you would do it if you were you could steer the US regulation to make it more sectorial and kind of driven by that. So let's shift a little bit the question of regulation to
sectorial and outcome based. I think it's very important to make it outcome based, less than concerned about the specifics of the techniques and the inputs that go in there. Just let's focus more on the outcome.
Okay, that sounds great. Now, what are the regulations, both in the US or internationally, that you think should be happening, but they are not even under considerations? Like, is there something that you think, okay, we really need to start thinking about that, but there doesn't seem to be a conversation about this?
I think people are. There's so much awareness about AI. It's so different than from 2017. There's so much awareness now that pretty much every subject I think is discussed somewhere. And but if you think about it, these same fragmentation problems, regulatory fragmentation problems that can arise if states and cities do their own thing, can happen globally. And having every country doing something different can be quite challenging because the deployment of AI is super global. And we are seeing how developers anywhere in the world are using models that are developed, or they're going through an API that is somewhere else in the world. So kind of the supply chain of AI is very global, and trying to address it from a regional or national perspective is super challenging. So I think which is the largest piece that is missing is international agreements on that. And I think that we're very, very early. Obviously, there's conversation in the UN. The African Union is now trying to do something as a region around the EU Act. There's an effort also to do something more global. But I think that's where we are far, far behind. And for things like thinking about safety and going more into the future, I think that global frameworks are critical.
Yes, that actually was exactly my next question. So some of the conversations, including coming from Sam Altman and OpenAI, is about the need for some international body that will help with thinking about, safety of AI and making sure that this technology is deployed safely globally. So how likely do you think having such a treaty or this kind of international body actually is?
Well, I think it's badly needed and very unlikely to happen. And let's just go to our recent experience over the last few decades. One of the things that make me proud when I was a foreign minister of my country, I was honored to sign a nuclear ban treaty. And the treaty is there. I think even the organization that promoted the agreement got a Nobel Prize. But it's just a treaty signed by certain countries, and the key players in that environment do not sign that treaty. And we can go and see how many problems, just because the reality of geopolitics and international competition make it very difficult for this to happen. So I think that these are extremely hard issues to get through a multilateral framework. But that's the one thing that we need the most. Actually, you can think of this problem in 3 ways. You can think of having everybody included. So the UN is a natural place. You have almost 200 countries there. You can think of subsets of that, perhaps like-minded countries, or you can think of bilateral agreements. For example, a China-US agreement on AI, a treaty on AI. I don't think that the political environment is there for that, but any of these frameworks would help a lot.
Okay, so you are essentially saying that like you're not optimistic, like you say, badly needed, but you're not optimistic. So
Right.
what is the alternative? So in particular, UK and now US have AI safety institutes. Like, what do you think about these developments? Like, do you think this is a step in the right direction? Like, how do you see the
Definitely
future of
steps
this?
in the right direction for sure, because they advance the thinking and the awareness, and they focus the debate. That doesn't mean that it's going to translate into real, binding type of regulatory of international treaties, as binding as international treaties can be. That might not happen, but these efforts are incredibly helpful to frame the problem and for people to understand what are the alternatives, and also to influence behavior. Even if there's no agreement, they can influence behavior, and hopefully they lead to communication. Just having conversations can be a tremendous accomplishment. Having the right people of the key countries talk about these issues, even if there's no agreement at the end, that would be a significant step.
Okay, so happy to hear that you like the AI safety institutes. I also am a big fan, but of course, as you say, this will not solve the problem. This is just the beginning of finding a solution. The other developments that, just full disclosure, this was something that I was very heavily involved in, is the frameworks for thinking about safety that the companies themselves advance. So Anthropic advanced the responsible scaling policy, and here at OpenAI we have preparedness framework. So how are you thinking about this kind of developments? Like, in what way they can hopefully positively advance this whole effort of thinking about AI safety?
I think two reactions to that. First, incredibly positive, and I think it's incredibly important that the leading companies pushing the boundaries are taking action and thinking about it. But second thought, I'm an economist, and I think that at the end of the day, companies are, driven by value maximization and profit maximization. So I think there's a role for regulation and the state to play. Very rarely have self-regulation being enough throughout history, and I think the economics is a big part of it. So I think those efforts would be much better complemented. I don't think substituted by government action, but I don't think that by themselves are going to be always enough.
I don't disagree, but I just want to pick on something you said about, these are like profit maximizing companies. Well, at least technically they are not. Both Anthropic is a long-term benefit, and OpenAI has the infamous non-profit structure.
I'm not going to pretend to claim that I understand the corporate structure of these two entities. So I'll defer to you on explaining that. But I think that and maybe makes them different. Hopefully that's a difference maker. But again, as an economist, I'm a bit skeptical about that.
I guess economists tend to be skeptical in general.
Yeah,
that's part of the job. Okay, so we talked a lot about the regulations and kind of the governments as the regulators of AI. But you mentioned the other users in particular, like the other aspects of government action, which is, for instance, they are the users of AI. Yep. You mentioned like tax returns. That might be one area where AI could have a transformative effect. What are the others?
I think governments are going through an awakening moment. It's a ChatGPT effect. And I think there are three levels of government adoption. The first one is just when government employees organically are using the tools. And then the challenge the governments face is how to regulate that. Should they have a policy on government on usage of these tools when they're doing their job? Using these tools pretty much as interfaces. So as, for example, chatbots for services, or, kind of for customer services, when you have you're retrieving information from your own database, these are essentially working with an LLM and doing some customization for better customer service or citizen services. I think that the big opportunity is to change workflows, and when you use you can use these tools and use their capabilities. Language recognition, image recognition, and use these technologies as agents that can shorten the workflows and make them more predictable, more certain, less vulnerable to corruption. For example, think of construction permitting. I think that's the least exciting topic that the audience of your
I could
podcast
find some more.
want to hear. But construction permitting, and there's a reason. Nobody wants to be in line for construction permitting. But if you can shorten the construction permitting process from, say, 90 days to 3 days, that would be incredibly good for the economy, for attracting investment. But also, you can make it not only make it faster, you can make it cheaper, and you can make it more secure because you have less human intervention, and those are opportunities for error and opportunities for corruption. And this is something that is relevant throughout the world. Every government, every jurisdiction has to deal with these things. Benefits, the dispersion of benefits, government services, social programs, can also be incredibly expedited and made more efficient here. Taxation is obviously an example. I always go back to taxation. It's an example of things. So the government can become more efficient, more transparent, and we can make bureaucracies more trustworthy with this. But where's the catch? The catch is that this requires a little bit of an entrepreneurial mentality, and that's sometimes challenging for governments, or a lot of times challenging for governments. So you need governments to be able to experiment, perhaps invest, and governments are always constrained about investing. The procurement process of government is never made for, let's try this experimental thing that nobody has used, and we're going to be the first user. Actually, governments go for exactly the opposite. The first question is, where has this worked? Why is this the best alternative? Is this the best cost, the cost effectiveness? So that gap of how do you go from, how do you get the first users to develop solutions and hopefully make those solutions products, not just bespoke services for individual governments? I think that's a fascinating challenge, but I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen, not immediately, but if we have this conversation again, 5 years, 10 years, governments will look quite different.
Okay, that's a good thought, I think, a very positive thought, and someone who actually has a lot of hands-on experience in the government. So if you are optimistic, then I will be optimistic as well.
I think it's going to be very frustrating in the beginning. I think that a lot of entrepreneurial people are going to try and fail, but eventually it will happen. And there's a tremendous upside for using AI in government services in general.
Okay, so that's great. So you mentioned that we have the role of governments as regulators, the role of governments as users. But there was a third one that you mentioned, I think is also very important, is the enablers of this technology.
Right.
So currently AI and the development of AI is essentially driven by the industry, also by the private capital. So do you see a role for governments kind of to play here?
Well, definitely there is a huge role. First of all, education. Most of the people who are very, very good at AI got their education supported by government somewhere in the world, including in the U.S. And just AI literacy, and that's something that governments play a huge role in education. That's an important piece. A lot of the development in AI happens also can be traced back to government investment in research and development. And that needs to continue. Even though now the frontier is being pushed by private companies, the need for public resources for basic research that has no obvious application when it's being done, I think that's crucial to keep this going. Not only to make AI better, but also to have the tools to make AI safer, more aligned. So I think fundamental research is very important. Some governments actually foster entrepreneurship, like a venture capital. It's not what governments in the US do, but particularly in Asia, you've had many governments that are very entrepreneurial and are actually actively funding startups. Certainly, China is a case to point. So that's another role, and then you have a critical element that I think is now becoming very visible, and it's part of the conversation, which is the whole infrastructure layer, including energy. So that's the amount of energy training the new cohorts of AI systems is likely to increase significantly, and that's something that the private sector alone will not be able to solve by itself. So because we're talking about basic infrastructure where the government plays a key role, sometimes owns power generation, depending on which country in the world, and that's a very significant enabler that the governments need to be actively investing if they want to foster development. And I think a lot of governments in the world already got the memo and are being very active about it.
Essentially about enabling or building up the energy that the energy infrastructure will be needed to fuel the AI, the compute that will be needed for developing AI.
Exactly. I mean, and some governments, including the U.S. with the CHIPS and Science Act, they are also supporting financially the development of chips. So it's not only energy, but I think that where if you think where the bottleneck can be rather soon, energy is probably the leading candidate in my mind, and that problem will not be solved without government action.
Okay, I actually fully agree with that. So this actually leads us into another topic I wanted to discuss with you at length, is geopolitics of AI. Right? Now we are talking no longer about the companies developing technology and competing as they should, but now you talk about countries, like investing, at the very least into the energy needed to fuel the compute, to fuel the AI. But essentially now we are at the geopolitics scene. So is there a geopolitics of AI? And if so, could you give us the lay of the land here?
I think so. I think it's quite visible. And there are different elements to it. You can think of the world as countries in terms of AI as makers and takers. So there are countries that are making AI. There are countries that are taking AI. The makers of AI are not that many.
Who are they?
Obviously, the U.S. and China. It's interesting because maybe 4 years ago, kind of the consensus was that there were these two AI superpowers. In fact, the Sky-Fu Lee's book, very popular, that was exactly that, AI superpowers. And the notion was that AI and that in AI, the US and China were kind of head to head. I think that now that's not necessarily the perception. The perception is probably that the US, because of US companies, is a little bit ahead, and also because of US policy, because of the difficulties that some countries, including China, are having into getting the basic inputs to do AI.
Sorry, could you say a little bit more about what do you mean by this China having trouble getting inputs into AI because of the regulation?
Yep. It's not that easy, for example, for a Chinese company today to get NVIDIA's GPUs, as the very well-known key kind of chips that are used to do AI. So, and that's because of US policy. I don't think that's a commercial decision from NVIDIA. I think NVIDIA adapts to that issue. So, and it doesn't mean that you cannot. Perhaps it doesn't mean you are the expert here, but it doesn't mean that they cannot do it. It's going to take it just takes more resources, more effort. It's much more inefficient to try to do it with those frontier chips. And there are these other regulations. Now you have, for example, the lithography tools this company, this is a Dutch company, ASML, that does the lithography, so that to actually print
the tools to build the chips.
The tools to build the chips also are under a restricted environment from U.S. policy. So if you are so China is now facing these headwinds, but also just the fact that these tremendous advancement happened in the U.S. It's U.S. companies that are driving the push towards the frontier. And so it's not just sanctions. I think it's just things that happen in a market economy, that sometimes you see these moments of innovation, and I think the U.S. is going through one of those. But I think the key conversation between in the geopolitics of AI is around China and the U.S. It remains to be China and the U.S. It doesn't mean that others are not relevant, but this is the key axis of tension. And I think a lot of the conversation in China, it's in a lot of the conversation in D.C. is centered around China. I mean, you've been to hearings in Washington and in Congress, and the China question is always there, and quite bipartisan, by the way. It's there are many concerns. So any kind of AI policy in the U.S. is either its resource allocation, regulation, the use of AI in the military. Everything is framed in this geopolitical context. And I'm much less familiar with what's going on in China, but I presume it's pretty much the same. So I think that's the first axis, the key, actually the critical relationship in the geopolitics of AI is between the U.S. and China. But then you have other players, and I'm always very concerned about the developing world, where the majority of the people in this planet actually live. That is just, are put in a position to be takers of whatever technology comes to them. And it's also, by the way, some of the places where AI can have the most significant impact. If you don't have a doctor, if you have a very good doctor, then the benefit of having AI doing diagnostics, there's some benefit, but you already have a very good doctor. But when you don't have doctors whatsoever, having an AI tool to help on that problem is significant. So the impact in the developing world is actually very interesting. It can be promising, but these countries are essentially receiving technology from abroad, and in relations that are quite asymmetric. Very little a government on the receiving end of the technology can have very little influence on what kind of technology they're receiving from the makers of AI.
Okay, so you touched on a lot of interesting topics, so let me revisit them one by one. So let's for now still talk about the US-China tensions, or maybe some people say rivalry. So clearly the rivalry lines are very clear. It's about who can build bigger models, who can get more GPUs, and there is all this export control coming to the play that you discuss. Is there room for cooperation? And if so, around what?
I think there's incredible room for cooperation, starting just with scientific exchanges. That is remarkable how a lot of the scientific conversation was frozen just a few years ago. And from being a very fluid conversation, and where scientists in the US, scientists in China learn from each other, I think that's been reduced to a small fraction of what it was. So naturally, when a lot of the issues are about understanding how this technology is going to evolve and how it's going to impact the world, having more people and exchanging notes and exchanging ideas, that should be an area of cooperation. Then also, then there are some issues that we're not addressing because of the geopolitical competition. So if there's an agreement on both sides, let's address these issues, specific issues that otherwise would think, oh, this is going to slow us down because we need to keep it up with China. But if both China and the US agree on, let's do these 2 or 3 things around AI safety, around or specific problems, that obviously there's potential, huge potential for agreement, but it's much easier said than done. Because it's not only the rivalry, but it's also very deep political and cultural differences. So, for example, take the question of misinformation and persuasion. The problem is technically the same in both countries, but how each government, how each political system thinks about it is radically different. The goals that you're trying to solve for are completely different. So, not all problems are easy to navigate, but there should be a few issues where there is actually no real reason not to do it together, and you will only be able to make real progress if you can remove the geopolitical competition element out of it.
Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly what you are saying in the context of safety, so by the way, the scientific collaboration, I'm, being a scientist, I'm all for it, but also I'm a realist, maybe economist in this regard, and I just again this ties very very deeply to like the essential leadership in about this technology. So yeah, I think that it will be very hard to get that going. But yes, safety, I definitely agree. This is a space that where hopefully there will be more collaboration, because there are clearly some red lines that neither of the country wants to happen. They don't want to have a catastrophe, AI-driven catastrophe. They don't want to have anything that will be really, really dangerous. So they both agree on that. Of course, then the question, this is like this usual analog to the nuclear weapons, is just like, how do you do it in a way that both sides trust each other and kind of really agree on what are the red lines exactly and why they should make sure, like, not only that they are obeying them, but they have trust that the other side is obeying.
I hear a lot the analogy to the nuclear framework, which is a very natural one, because that's relevant. But AI is a general purpose technology, and nuclear weapons, even though you can use nuclear energy for different things, but it's not a general purpose technology with such a wide range of application as nuclear. So that makes it a lot more difficult to create a framework like that. But I agree that, particularly around AI safety, just having conversation around that, there are probably some areas where once you sit down, you figure out, okay, we're aligned on this. Let's just have an agreement on this. And of course, you then get into the usual problems around treaties, which is who's monitoring and who's enforcing. I mean, there's no global governments and there's no global enforcement authority. So the benefits are always limited. But I think would we be in a better position to address AI safety risks, having these conversations between the US and China? I think yes. I think the answer is yes. Would that be a marginal benefit or a significant game-changing benefit? Probably it's going to be more on the marginal side, but that's not a reason not to try it.
Okay, that's a great point. So actually going back again to the geopolitical picture. So you said there are, as you say, makers and takers. And for now, you identified two makers, China and the US. Mm-hmm. Who are the other countries that you seem at least are on the verge of being the makers, or are the makers right now? And what for the countries like, Mexico or Poland, mm-hmm. just like countries that might not be superpowers by themselves, but are relatively big economies with like smart people and kind of ability to do something here. Like, what is the role for them to play in this geopolitical picture?
I think there are countries that are smaller, but they're definitely in the makers category. Perhaps not at the level of the US or maybe China, but for example, Singapore, South Korea, Israel have incredible capabilities, startups doing things. So it's not only the US and China, and then you have countries that are kind of figuring out if they want to be makers or takers. I think the European Union belongs to that category. Definitely, you have some great news lately. I think everybody's talking about Mistral out of France and how suddenly almost out of the blue, you have an incredibly competent company doing open source models very quickly. But also you see this regulatory framework challenging the maker position. So I think it's kind of TBD if Europe is going to be a maker or a taker. It will depend a lot. It will depend a lot on that. But unfortunately, it's countries, say, like all of those in Latin America, in Africa, in other places, Eastern Europe, where clearly you don't have you're so far behind that you're in the maker category. So
you mean taker?
You're in the. I'm sorry, I said yeah. I mean absolutely. I mean taker. So for those countries, the AI policy challenge is very different. Is how are you going to deal with this technology that is absolutely transformational, can be great, can be dangerous. How are you going to deal with it when you don't have control of what you're taking?
Yeah, so you put once again a finger on something very, very important, exactly the role of, in particular, Global South in all of this, right? Like if they are relegated currently to being the takers, like that does not sound like the right way to shape the future. In particular, there is, so how do we fix it? So we say there's a lot of challenges. The question is like, can we do something to kind of make sure to level the play field a little bit, to kind of also people talk about distributing the benefits of AI, because we do expect AI to bring a lot of benefits, but they might be unevenly distributed, right? Just because the makers are in a more privileged position. So is there something we should do to kind of distribute this benefit a bit more broadly?
I think, first of all, countries are starting to realize this challenge, countries in the developing world. And you see a lot of countries now trying to develop a data sovereignty policy. They're trying to do, within country data localization and even the compute. So NVIDIA the other day talked about many sovereigns becoming customers of NVIDIA because countries want to have compute within their territories. I think that's a better place to be, but that might not be enough because it's very unlikely that even if you have a GPU cluster and some very smart people, are you going to be developing the base models on which the country is going to be developing AI on top of? And maybe, but that's right now seems very, very unlikely. So I think it's more about understanding that your country is on the receiving end of a global supply chain, and how do you interconnect with that, and how do you inspect the consequences of connecting, and what can you ask from the providers that are supplying the upstream layers into your country. So it becomes kind of it's more similar to import control that countries are more familiar with. But how do you? Unfortunately, I don't see many countries thinking about this problem in this framework. I think there's a lot of emphasis on let's have our own data. Let's have with the perhaps intention, maybe illusion, that they can do their own AI. Instead of acknowledging that maybe they're going to be fine-tuning, they're going to be building on top of tools that will be imported.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, what you are saying, you're just saying, okay, so for the smaller countries, they first probably correct instinct is to go for sovereignty. So essentially like have some data sovereignty rules where they say essentially data that was produced in this country stays in this country. So kind of this way because we know that data is a very important input into AI.
Yep.
And then the other is the compute sovereignty. So essentially we want to have compute also in our country so we can actually are, at least in principle, capable of training the models. But then you point out that, okay, but the way the AI landscape is shaped right now is there's this big base models like developed by Google, OpenAI, Anthropic currently, Facebook or Meta, and kind of in some sense it's not clear if a smaller country could just build their own version of this. So they probably will essentially re-importing this base model from somewhere else. And then the question is like, how do you set up this imports control, I guess?
Yeah, and some people would say, okay, that argument is not necessarily true because you have open source, and then these countries can work with open source models, and there's no dependency on somebody else's API or whatever. Yeah, but that's like that. If that's the solution, then you are constraining the developing world to work only with open source models, and you're banking on the idea that open source models will eventually become as good as the closed source, which absolutely is a very uncertain claim, and I think it's a questionable claim. So. I think that if for certain tasks, for certain things, using an open source model and keeping the compute and the data in your country, that's perfectly fine. But the difficult question is, how can you seize the opportunity of the cutting edge AI, the AI that is going to be very soon very good, better than what we know today? How do you do it in a way that perhaps how can you bring the benefits of that technology to your country in a way that is safe and that is according to your national interest? And that the only way to do that, I think, is engaging in a dialogue with the providers of the base models, understanding their terms and services, and see what kind of interaction as a government can you have. Okay, you're going to be coming to this particular to my country. That's fine. We welcome you. We want you here. But what are the rules? What are the what kind of how are we? For example, we're going to allocate liability. What guarantees can you provide? What warnings are you going to be able to give us? What kind of commitment are you making to the country that when you are seeing things that should not be done, that we're doing wrong, are you going to help us or not? Are you going to just say, okay, that's not my issue. I just gave you the base intelligence and you did what you did. So I think that establishing a working relationship between the governments in the taker countries with the developers of the base models, I think that would be a reasonable approach.
Have you seen any country that is already starting to think this way and act this way?
No.
Okay, so I guess being an optimist.
Well, maybe. I can think of a couple, but it's more. I think the relationship with the base models are suppliers like an Anthropic or an OpenAI. Right now, it's more about let's use your capabilities to do something related to government, but it's not really about what are the rules of the game when you deploy your capabilities into our country.
But maybe this will come once they start applying these tools. They will get better understanding of what is important and kind of what they should be paying attention to, and maybe that's where this will happen.
Yeah, but I think this conversation is essential because, again, just saying okay, the developing world should only do open source is like, why? That's like geopolitical discrimination.
Yes, well, of course, they always have a choice. Okay, I completely agree. So I will not be even trying to push back about this, against this. It's just, but yeah, open source has this leveling the field kind of property, but there are other reasons why you should not maybe be banking on this being always the option that will be cutting edge, which currently definitely is not.
Yep.
So, okay, great. So let me transition a little bit and talk about your time at MIT. So again, after being this great career in government, Rafael, who was the president of MIT at that time, calls you and you decide to come to MIT. Why? Don't get me wrong, Rafael is a wonderful person. I also would want to do whatever he asked me to do, but still, why?
First of all, I was unemployed. I was starting to look for a job, and when MIT comes knocking your door, it's very hard to say no. It's a fascinating place. I think it's home to some of the greatest minds in the world, and I was so intrigued about learning more about and about the intersection between policy, governments, and AI. It was not a hard decision.
Okay, so this brings me to this other question that, by the way, is something that I think about a lot. So what should be the role of a place like MIT or academic institutions in this whole AI picture, both AI as technology, but also in the context of AI policy? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first, a place like MIT and other academic institutions in the US and other places in the world have an incredible convening power. So these are great places where you can create conversations. Bringing together scientists, developers, companies, and governments, and these are very, very appropriate environments for these conversations to occur. Second, I think that a place like MIT probably would not be that good at doing AI policy research, but it can definitely be extremely good doing policy relevant research, and I think that that's happening now. I think because the scientists, compared to what it was 5 years ago, scientists were very barely, with a few exceptions, obviously, but very few scientists were interested in policy challenges. I think that now that's much more prevalent, and policy relevant research is happening a lot more. But just having a more intentional, coordinated resource allocation into that can be impactful. I think that that's what attracted me into MIT, and particularly into the Schwarzman College of Computing. The promise that it can pool resources from across the institute and have these collaborations happening and allocating resources into relevant problems, I think it's very promising, and I think it's every academic institution is trying different ways, but perhaps not at the pace that I would like to see, because I'm impatient. But I think we are the academic institutions are very, very, very important. Unfortunately, perhaps because of a scaling issue, academia is not the place where frontier advancement is happening. So governments can not only rely on academia, but having academia with you when dealing with companies is incredibly helpful. So I think places like MIT should be, and MIT is not a monolith, but I mean the some of the best and brightest minds in AI are in a place like MIT, can be incredible conversation partners in this dialogue that should not happen only between companies and governments.
Okay, so you are saying essentially is one of them is the convening power of academia to bring people from across the government, civic society, and from industry to have these important conversations about what the future of AI we want and how to get there. And the other one is saying, okay, they develop actually technology, and like I think very important technology, but indeed they are not building these huge base models. But there is a plenty of other important technical questions they can pursue, but also they are good, as you say, to have along, to kind of as a trusted experts when you have conversations with industry. So that's kind of roughly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, scientists, particularly in computer science, are great problem solvers. So, having computer scientists think about use cases in government is something that happens very infrequently, because probably scientists think of those problems as incredibly boring. Let's go back to my government construction permitting example. I don't think
I got fascinated by this. I don't know.
No, I don't think that scientists are naturally drawn, let's say, to these problems. But these are just attracting and providing the framework for having some of these incredibly bright minds work in government relevant problems. Could also be a very interesting contribution.
Okay, so clearly, and this is probably already hinted to, like the good thing about the policymakers right now that they definitely think and care about AI, but I would say there is still a gap in the understanding of like this technology. So, what do you think about like kind of if you think about the policymakers, if you kind of wanted to give them advice, what they should understand about AI that they may not fully understand yet, as far as you can tell?
I think that, people fixate either on what we have today and what's in the distant future. So right now, a lot of people in government talk about LLMs and what the LLM can do.
The large language
models, what an LLM can do, what these particular functionalities. But there's not a lot of thought on where this is going. And we're not talking at the end of the road with AGI and superintelligence, but the fact that just for governments to understand a little bit better where this might go in the not so distant future makes a huge difference. Because otherwise, so just becoming a little bit more fluent and talk to scientists either in companies or in academia that are at the forefront of innovation to understand where this might go. It would be super useful. I don't think that scientists are doing that. That politicians and regulators, policymakers are necessarily doing that. A lot of the information that they consume is very backward-looking, there's no established mechanism to talk to the scientists. And there are, of course, intellectual property issues and competition issues. But just having a conversation a little bit closer to the edge of what's happening can be really, really important. You don't want policy to be, to overfit into the current things when these things are going to change very rapidly.
Yes. So Exactly. So you're saying the policymakers pay attention to AI, but they mostly kind of are consumers of what already happened, as opposed to thinking enough about what's still to come. And honestly, even though I am very close in the kind of to the core of AI developments, I still sometimes am surprised usually by the pace. So I'm not surprised by the developments themselves, but about the timelines. So going back to your first encounter with AI in 2015, you said you got the bug, but did you envision that things will evolve, that essentially AI will become so big so fast?
No, I thought it was quite possible, but I never expected such a short timeline. I was not expecting to see the actual capabilities deployed worldwide that we see already. And we get very quickly really used to them. But what we're seeing today in AI is remarkable. And I was not expecting this to happen so fast.
Okay, so by the way, same here. As I said, just I guess we always are as humans not good at kind of predicting or anticipating the progress of an exponential technology, which is what UN was right all along, that this is an exponential technology. So other than pace, what are the other things about AI that surprise you the most about the development of AI?
I think that the fact that we don't really understand why these things work is both fascinating, scary, and amazing. I the other day, I think it was Demis Hassabis who I heard saying that when Alessandro Volta invented the battery in the year 1800, he then explained why the battery worked, and he was completely wrong. And it took 60 years to get to the Maxwell equations and actually understand the workings of a battery. 60 years of a battery being invented. It happens all the time that the human race invents things that we don't fully understand. And I think that just the fact, because I mean, I'm going to say something that is technically kind of a very simplistic, but if you think about it, we're getting to intelligence, to human level intelligence, essentially by brute force. We are expanding on Rosenblatt's invention in 1958, the perceptron, and perhaps before. We're just pushing that to the limit harder. And I mean, I don't want to be dismissive of many innovations that happen in between, but this idea that just by scaling a simplified or a version of a neural network and just making it big, very, very big. And I presume, I'm pretty sure the engineering challenges to actually make that work are incredible, and very hard to do. But just the fact that what we're doing is just scaling a simple concept, and we're getting into these incredibly complex systems that can do these amazing things, I find it incredible.
Well, again, same here. But now let me ask a different question. So this is the things that, surprise you the most in a positive way about AI. What do you think AI has undelivered on so far?
Let me go back to the developing world. And I think there's a lot of promise that has not really happened. So, for example, financial inclusion. There was this idea, a lot of talk a few years ago that, when you can process alternative data like AI can do. So not just a credit report, but in jurisdictions where even credit reports do not exist, now you can go through social media. Now you can go through other types of information and train models that predict who's going to pay a loan or who's not. That would be an incredible difference maker for financial inclusion, for allow this many people who are unbanked to actually be banked. I think that's happening very slowly, but that's an area where I think getting from a concept to actually deploying a solution at scale is incredibly difficult. And I think sometimes we're very naive about and kind of dismissive of this not so interesting work of deployment. And it can be very frustrating, and some of the promises have not been delivered yet. But you can think, for example, also in healthcare. Years ago, it's been years since we see in the front pages of newspapers this algorithm that can be extremely good at detecting cancer from lung cancer from looking at X-rays and MRIs and or ultrasound, and yeah, the possibility is there, but it's not changing the world yet. At least maybe it will, but it's taking a long time. And I think the nuances of how you deploy AI, how do you make it real at scale, have been grossly underestimated.
Okay, so if you think about AI and this change and this like AI revolution that we are living through, do you think that ultimately it will be good or bad to us?
I think it's good. I'm an optimist, and I think and I think it can be really, really good. But I don't think anybody knows. We don't know. But we continue. We are expanding this so rapidly that we don't know. But this is probably I cannot articulate it properly because the reality is uncertainty, and I kind of challenge anybody who claims that they know what's going to happen, if it's going to be good or this is a doom likely scenario, whatever. I don't. I think that we should be very cautious in claiming that we know what's going to happen. But my sentiment, perhaps that's by own nature, I'm more of an optimist. So I kind of think that this is going to be a lot more good than negative.
Okay. Now our traditional final question. So what are you personally looking forward to, or like the most or the least regarding AI?
I would say from a practical perspective, I think I'm really looking forward to this more complex deployment of AI that need more work, that need more investment, but that can transform workflows in industry and in government. I'm super interested to see that happening. And what are the economics and the incentives to make that happen? So it's both an economics problem and as much as a technical problem. And from a more of a curiosity aspect, it's just I want to see where this goes. Is scaling the answer? We're going to get to AGI and beyond just by making these things bigger, or is there a limit? And we'll find that we need something else, a fundamental innovation to get there. To me, that's one of the most fascinating questions of our time, perhaps the most fascinating questions in technology of our time. And those be. I think I only mentioned good things, but those are the things that those are the things that I'm more interested about.
So essentially, you are looking to the new intellectual challenges that this will bring in.
Yeah, I definitely, but also to the practical opportunities and the practical challenges of going for deployment beyond the low-hanging fruits, where the benefits can be huge, but something needs to happen. Some incentives need to be created, some entrepreneurial element, some laws need to be changed, or a company needs to be created. That I'm very attracted to.
Thank you, Luis. This was a fascinating conversation, although I must say you mentioned preparedness only 4 times, not 10, so we will need to fix it some other time.
No, we'll talk about preparedness.
Definitely.
Thank you, Alexander. This is great, and I think this podcast is going to have a tremendous impact.
Let's hope that's the point here. That's at least that's the intention. So thank you. Today we had the pleasure of speaking with Luis Videgaray. Luis is a former policymaker who thought deeply about AI, what it means to us as a technology, but also how it will transform our governments and what governments should do about that. If you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, please share these episodes with your friends, subscribe, and leave comments with your feedback. Thank you.